this is essentially the talk that I gave in Bucharest. You're getting the second half first and you're going to get the first half second. So we will actually get on to Sophia Morrison a bit earlier than I did in the other talk as well. This is a great phrase. I mean, 6 or 7 notebooks full of charms, and we'll come on to where this comes from in a minute. But I think first of all, I always have this inevitable first slide. I have to do this to, when I'm with other audiences, to remind them where the Isle of Man is. I hope you don't have to be reminded where the Isle of Man is. But I think this one on the right is useful for people from Peel. It shows you there's other... Yes! It shows you other places in the Isle of Man you can visit.
I always wondered where Douglas was.
That's right. I mean, you go there once a year, but there's Ramsey, which is very pleasant. I was there the other day. You can get there and back in the day. You get there before it gets dark. And there's also Castletown. They've got a castle. Yeah, they've got a roof on their castle, so when you go in there, it doesn't get wet. So, so I say, maybe get out and about. So anyway, so this is the usual slide that I always have to show other audiences to make them aware of where the Isle of Man is, and also too what the Isle of Man looks like as well. There's another useful thing here, sort of a little bit of always background to the island. I think it's always well worth us reminding that we are a prisoner of geography in many particular cases. We are the size that we are, and so we are the people that we are. And so the material that I can draw on for this particular talk is being drawn on from a very small number of people in the past who've left a particular sort of record of their particular life. So we have to be reminded the Isle of Man in old money, it's 220 square miles. If you can figure out what that means in square kilometres, then good luck to you. And so another thing, it's always, I say again, reminding us of just how small we were in the past. There was a census done, Bishop Wilson did it in 1720. So he didn't do it personally, but I mean, he made the vicars do it and the rectors do it. And there was a head count. So 1726, there's 14,426 people enumerated in the island. And of course, this is the time of the running trade as well. So this is when you have to remember there's a large number there. There will be a number here of sort of Scottish merchants, Irish merchants, English merchants as well. So the sort of the Manx is probably much smaller than that. So I think it's always remarkable that we have persisted as a community, that particularly, especially the language. You can see there from the 1901 census, people like Sophia Morrison and many of the early enthusiasts for the revival of the Manx language were surprised that there were so many speakers. I mean, you can argue about how fluent these speakers were, the people who didn't declare themselves as Manx speakers who were caught up. So it's probably yin and yang in many particular way as to what the numbers are. But we certainly know that the generational transmission of the language certainly ceases in the 1850s. But still, it carries on. The last native speaker, you can always argue what a native speaker is, and was Ned Madrill a true native? But nevertheless, Ned Madrill was there. He was there till 1970. If he would have lived a few days longer, the language would have been on into 1975,
Yeah.
But we've long had we have to always remember that the language of administration of this island has been English. So for like half a millennium, over 500 years, we've had English here as sort of, the language that you had to interact with officialdom as well. So I think it is remarkable that the Manx language in many ways, I think we always have to, and I was speaking to Phil about this the other time as well, is it the Manx language has persisted in many particular ways, the Manx language has resisted. It's resisted, and I think that is a great sort of tribute to those speakers who did indeed maintain the language, and to people like Sophia Morrison and Otti Jochen and Edmund Good and all the others who strove to revive the language, or actually not even to revive the language. I think perhaps lose that word and just simply say to allow the language to persist, allow the language to continue. But anyway, this is another thing as well that I was thinking about as well, is that often we hear about the Isle of Man being described as being in the centre of the Irish Sea. Well, it's not in the centre of the Irish Sea in many ways. It's in the north of the Irish Sea. And I know I'm speaking to the Celtic Congress, and you may not like this particular notion of saying to need to avoid any notion of a Celtic silo, but I think there's always this great phrase that you always hear, the land divides and the sea unites. And I think it's always well worth remembering that whilst we are a distinctive Manx community, that nevertheless there are other distinctive communities literally within sight of us, to be quite frank. You go to the Northern Plain there, you can see Scotland, and we know there's long been an interaction between the north of the island and Scotland. Also towards to the east, England, of course, which is visible again, and we remember that the Manx Bible was printed in Whitehaven. It's not printed in Liverpool, it's not printed in Manchester. Whitehaven is the port of entry to the Isle of Man in this particular period. To the west, Ulster, I know it's just about visible. You can always see the mountains of Mourne, and less contact, but still visible. So many ways, we have the Isle of Man here. We have our Manx. We also have English as well. We have our Manx English as well. But it's well worth reminding ourselves that there are other communities there. Lowland Scots speakers to the north of us. To the east of us, we have sort of northern speakers of the northern varieties of English, and over to the west, less contact, but certainly we have, Ulster Scots. We also have Irish speakers as well. And we also when we look at some of the charms as well, some of the charms are mentioned as having been taught to people in the Isle of Man by Irish women. So there's clearly early modern contact there between Ulster and the Isle of Man. So anyway, let's just sort of set the picture. And as I say, so we're getting the second half of the talk as the first half of the talk now. So instead of us building up to the charm collectors, let's have a look at these two particular charm collectors. These names should be familiar to us. If not, they will be familiar to us. Dr John Clague and Sophia Morrison. And here's what he looks like. This is a fantastic photograph of Dr John Clague. This is him from 1901. This is when he'd retired from practice. He had a heart condition, is what killed him in the end. He dies in 1908. So you can see he is sort of, but still standing strong, still standing firm here. And if you want to know who and what he did, he tells us here, 1879. I'm medical practitioner in Castletown. I have extensive practice both in that town and the neighbouring parishes. His practice carries me through the parishes of Santon, Rushen, Arbury and Maloo. And that was very much when he was out collecting folk songs in collaboration with the mighty Gill brothers in the 1890s. This is where he did his particular collecting. There was a wonderful notion of franchising of the island, that Clague would have Rushen and that the Gill brothers could be left to wander around the rest of the island. And it is to both their credits that Clague did indeed collect largely in Russian sheeting. No one was found in Santon, but he sort of collected largely, I say, in Russian, Arbury and Maloo, and the Gill brothers did indeed range all around the particular island. So here we have Clague, and what sources do we have for Clague's material here? So we obviously have here the Manx Reminiscences, which is an absolutely wonderful book, comes out 1911. As I say, it was the memorial volume for Clague. It was going to be the folk song collection. Sophia Morrison was involved in that, and she had hoped that Clague's folk song collecting would be published by Curwen of London, and that this would be the memorial volume, as it were, for Clague. It wasn't to be so. It was the Reverend John Cooley, who was his great friend, along with Sybil Payton, and they edited material that Clague had left behind. Clearly, Clague had been working in some particular sense on a set of reminiscences, a life history, a life story, and this is what comes out in 1911. We have very little of Clague's material. Clague's notebooks, Clague's library passed to the Reverend John Cooley. Crofton was cleared out. All that material went up to the rectory at Andrus. And then when Cooley retired, when he gave up the archdeaconry and retired back to Castletown, that material just simply seems to have been tossed. It's an absolute shame, but that's simply gone. What has been left, thank God, are the tune books, which weren't tossed, and a set of notebooks, which George Broderick has edited. And along with this wonderful notebook here, this is, I just know them by the manuscript numbers. I always refer to 9528, it's 9528. It's a wonderful notebook. It contains the material that turns up in Manx Reminiscences. It starts to be compiled about 1892, or rather it's a diary for 1892. So that's clearly when Clague starts to collect folklore, or rather this batch of folklore that he was collecting. The Clague collection has been published in Cantatio, which is an open access journal. So if you want to read Clague's collection, you can download that for free. It doesn't lie behind a paywall, as a lot of academic work does these days. So once again, that's published by the Romanian Academy of Sciences. And again, I want to thank Emmanuel Timotin for editing that piece for the journal. So the great thing, though, about Manx Reminiscences is it doesn't just contain charms. It also has Clague's own encounters with charmers as well. So this gives an extra layer of fascination to this particular material here. And I love the way some of these quotes start off. I remember an old man, John Kelly, is making a charm to stop blood. And he came to me when I was a boy, and he gave the charm to me, and he said I was the nearest relation to him. He gave me a piece of paper, and the charm was written on it. This is why when you look amongst the manuscript collections of the Manx Museum Library, I'm not going to talk about the manuscript charms today, you do see a number of written charms. And this is clearly the practice, is that you have someone who is a charmer. You go to him or you go to her, and they will write the charm down for you. And so you have that charm for yourself to use at another date. And he said to me, write it out and do not show it to anybody. If I should be wanting to give the charm to any other person, I must do the same, and I must not give it to any man. This actually is incorrect, to be honest. He says the charm must always be given one of the opposite sex. This is not the way it goes. Charms are transmitted by gender. Male can give to male, female can give to female. The male gives to a female. Well, they wouldn't do that anyway because the charm has no efficacy. The charm does not work. It has to go from male to male, female to female for the charm. So this is John Kelly. Now, what I find interesting about this as well is that Clague's background, his mother clearly was a charmer. And it says, this is an interview here with Charles Corran. This comes from the Manx Folklife Survey here. Dr. Clague's mother could cure by charming. She cured Tommy Doran's lame leg with tramon berries. And too, Clague himself seems to have sort of worked in this area as well. He mentions here, this is from you can see it's from the Alaman Examiner here from 1908. There are people yet living who remember the youth treating his fellows with the simples to be found growing in the fields and hedgerows of Kirk Arbory. And many years ago, I was once talking to someone whose partner was a doctor, and said that many in the medical profession, and you do see that a lot of research that has been done on folk medicine is done not necessarily all by folklorists, a lot of it is done by doctors themselves. And there is this particular fascination, this is what I was told, there's a particular fascination of doctors who, many people who do train to be doctors feel a calling. They feel they have what's often called, I know someone who teaches in a medical school and say, they have what's called the healing hand complex. They have the notion that they can heal, that they are healers. And there is that also notion as well of these charmers and these people out in the countryside and the towns as well, who themselves are healers as well. So there's almost two forms of knowledge there. You've got the official knowledge that you are taught when you go to a medical school, and there's the unofficial knowledge, the practice of charmers. But people do feel that they are called, they have this innate ability to heal. So I find that quite fascinating. So that's Clague's. And this is a great one. I think people may know this one of people who have often said that someone who has the word. You'll often hear this of someone who will say things like, oh yes, she had the word. Yes, he had the word. And what is meant in the Isle of Man by someone who has the word is someone who can stop blood. And this is the great one. This is Clague himself, giving us, as once again, he's saying here, I once saw a man with his foot cut very deeply, a horse machine for reaping. You can see just how these charmers were called upon, the dangers of agricultural work, the dangers even work in industry, but especially with us being largely an agricultural community here, the chances for being harmed, it's just there in everyday practice as well here. Sent for a man who had the charm to stop blood. He was not able to do it, and the man and the charmer fast as they could. The charmer said the words 2 or 3 times. And this here really, you can see here is Clague saying, well, charming works some of the time, but, I know how to really do it, and it says here, the man who was cut felt better because the charmer was with him because he was not so afraid. So I think Clague is basically saying, I'm the one here with the healing hand. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but I can always make it work. But still, this particular notion here of this notion of people who have the word. And If I'm going too fast, just let me know, by the way. Is this fine for everyone? The right pace? I should actually always ask to do that. I think everyone can hear me. I don't need to. I think my voice carries, but whether I'm talking a bit too fast or not, I don't know. And this is the charm. This is one of the great things of Clague's collection. We have the charm. As he says here, I got this charm from John Kelly. He says here 1860, which is unusual. I mean, this is. I think this is maybe being written down, as he says, is written down for Clague, likely to be dated. I don't know, but it's useful here. O Lord, hear my prayer in thy righteousness. Give ear to my prayer in thy faithfulness. Sin first began in Adam and Eve, and in thy sight I now charge this blood to be stopped. Amen. We're gonna have a lot of charms this afternoon. I love them. The language of them is just absolutely wonderful. And you can see how people who have, in this particular period, people did have deep Christian faith. So people had a faith, and you could see how they could feel that they were being reassured by figures from the Bible being called upon here, Adam and Eve and so on being called upon, and the Lord being called upon to help people as well. What does the Clague collection, however, consist of? Well, it consists of 13 charms, and it's useful to run through them. You can see that the majority of them here, or this is to stop blood. But it's not just stopping blood, and the bottom one there is to get blood. So you've got at both ends there as well, if you're bleeding, well, they can help out. If you're not bleeding, they can help out as well, to cure enlarged glands, to cure looseness, as it was called. In other words, we're talking about diarrhea, mumps, which of course has gone now with vaccines, but in those particular days there, ringworm, skin diseases here, the king's evil, to relieve sprained joints. This is hard physical labor that people are doing these days, even in the fields or at sea, whatever. To remove styes, to remove warts, all sort of skin conditions, abrasions that you can see from the sort of work that people were doing as well. And as I say, to get blood there. There is one missing there. Can anyone spot it is? It took me a while to spot what it is. No. Well, we'll wait because Sophia Morrison also misses it as well. So when we come on to Sophia Morrison, you can get a chance. Well, I'll tell you now. Toothache. Yeah, it just struck me the other day. Not saying that I can be caught out as well. I just didn't notice that. That's surprising. There are charms for toothache. Obviously, maybe Manx teeth were really good in this period. I don't think so. I think they're as bad as they are at any particular time. But there's nothing there for toothache, which is a bit of a surprise. Okay, let's get on to Sophia Morrison. This is the famous photograph taken from the Celtic Congress in 1904. We can have a vote here, or maybe decide who thinks Sophia Morrison is on the left. Hands in the air. Just one hand. Who thinks Sophia Morrison is the figure on the right? Oh, dearie me. Oh, you can leave now. But still, okay. We don't know which one is which, by the way. I mean, one is Sophia Morrison and one is Otti Jochen. Otti Jochen is another of these sort of great unsung figures of the Manx revival as well. She was the one who was the teacher of the Manx language class. It was set up by Sophia Morrison and Otti Jochen and others, but she was the one who was the teacher. She also taught here. She taught the children of the Sunday school for Peel Wesleyan Chapel as well. And so she's, absolutely remarkable. These figures, without them we wouldn't have what we have now. They set the foundation. Although the figure before them, who is not really celebrated, is William Neen. He was the town missionary of the Bethel in Douglas, and he holds the first conversational class in Manx. And it's his wife who comes through, and she gives a lecture in Peel, and it's after giving this lecture in Peel, it's when Sophia Morrison, Otti Jochen and others, they decide then that there should be a similar class for teaching Manx in Peel as well. But these are the unsung heroes. And, this is... Do I need to tell you Sophia Morrison is? Well, why not tell you again who Sophia Morrison is? An absolutely remarkable character. This is a wonderful phrase. Absolutely wonderful. I love these phrases that come from these letters, Miss Morrison at the wheel. If we'd not Miss Morrison at the wheel, I'm afraid our ship would have foundered long ago. I only hope that she may be long spared to carry on her labour of love. It's 1915, as we know, she dies 1917, so she wasn't spared that much longer to carry on her labour of love. I say, This ship was the Manx Language Revival, and Morrison was indeed its captain, and she played a wider role in the wider pan-Celtic movement of the time. She was a folklorist, folk song collector, pioneer of recording with the phonograph. They were out collecting with a phonograph in 1905, and that was thanks to her. Secretary of the Manx Language Society. She was the editor of Mannin, which she founded herself, edited herself, and largely financed herself as well. Say she was a founder of the Peel language class, amongst other activities. You can carry on. You can have another slide with what she did. Member of the Peel Players, holding on old Christmas Day, having a sort of Manx event there in the Albert Hall, not the one in London, the one here in Peel. And yes, remarkable figure, a remarkable figure about who we still know so little, to be honest. But Mr. Fazen. If you want to know where the title for this talk comes from, here it comes from. It's the letter to Carl Roeder, another incredible figure, and another figure who, thanks to his friendship with Edward Farragher of Craignish, collected so much Manx material that would have been lost. And so this is a fragment of a letter here between Sophia Morrison and Carl Roeder here. It dates from about 1902, 1903. And this is the sort of stuff you start to, my God, during this past month, I've collected 6 or 7 notebooks full of charms and herbal remedies. It was only when I was reading through these slides then I thought, hang on, this is just in 1 month. Unless she's exaggerating, but even if she's exaggerating, if she just said during the past few months, I've collected 6 or 7 notebooks full of charms and herbal remedies. This just shows someone who is active in the field. This is not someone who's just content just to get 1 or 2 and say, oh, that's quite pleasant. Okay. No, this is full-on serious collecting. 6 or 7 notebooks full of charms or herbal remedies. And we do have here, once again, just as we have Clague's encounters with charmers, we also have Morrison here. Her encounter with a charmer as well. But this is a bit more. We just get simply, Clague just simply meets this person. Here we have Morrison is clearly out and about. She's out picking blaeberries on South Barrule, as one does. She's out there, and she meets a family pulling ling for winter firing. There's obviously someone here who's a native Manx speaker here. Manx is the man's Jengi Namara, and so delighted was he to speak at some. So obviously Morrison is speaking to him in Manx, and that I ventured to ask him if he had any charms. And indeed he does. He at once said yes, and gave me one. Once again, here we know, as they say, it's male to male, female to female. But to avoid losing any of its virtue, he asked for my notebook, put it on top of the cartwheel, and wrote it down there, for writing does not count, which is intricate. And this is what he wrote down. So thank goodness we actually have the particular text here. As God said unto Moses, as thy river shall be as my river, and thy water is my water, and thy blood is my blood. Why won't my blood stop also thy blood? You can put down the person's name in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. So I think it's a wonderful example there of Morrison there, active. As soon as she sees someone, she'll go up to them, speak to them in Manx, and ask them, do they have any folklore? And if they have any folklore, gets it down there for us. And we have it to this day. We have it to this day. So all praise to her. So we have this another mention of her collecting here. And this is once again to Carl Roeder, another figure, as I say, who needs more research on him. He needs a talk on Roeder as well. There's an amazing set of letters between Sophia Morrison and Carl Roeder. It's an absolutely wonderful correspondence between the pair. And it says here, I send you my notes on charmers and charmers, Manx dye plants and herbal remedies. I collected them about 4 years ago, which would match the encountering on South Barrule here. And I've added nothing to them since. I've always intended to work them up, but from lack of time have not done so. But I think fortunately the material that was sent to Roeder possibly came back because Carl Roeder's papers were in large part lost. I mean, this is what we deal with. We deal with these folklores like A.W. Moore, the Gill brothers, Clague, Morrison, Roeder. They're all out collecting, and yet they're all well aware that what they see as a fading, a passing culture, expressive culture, they see this folklore is going and so on, but they're also well aware that their own collections themselves may well disappear as well. There's a wonderful letter where A.W. Moore writes to Carl Roeder and says that print is safer than manuscript. In other words, publish everything. If you leave it in manuscript, there's a chance that it will go. Just as A.W. Moore's material went. A.W. Moore dies, Cronkburn House is cleared out, Moore's material simply goes. The Gill brothers, W.H. Gill left it to his daughters just simply binned everything. Carl Roeder went into a sanitarium at one time, put his papers into storage, came out, his papers are lost. So we have this particular, the loss of papers from these particular collectors. It's just sad. It's almost terrifying to think of what was collected and what has been lost. And so, but we certainly know that Morrison was intending to write at least an article on folk medicine, because there's the outline of it amongst her papers, and it does show you, that she was intending to sort of publish an article. There's more than enough material amongst her papers for a book, to be honest. Her collecting is absolutely remarkable, and this is only from what we can see. Folklorists always want more. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You look at her material and something. Well, what else did she collect? What else has been lost? But anyway, but material does survive. Material does exist. And I was quite surprised that when I edited the material for publication, I didn't count up how many charms there was. And I didn't. Only after I'd published the article, I thought I better count. Seems to be a lot of charms here, I thought, and actually went through and counted them up. This is what we come to, 70 charms. This is amongst her personal papers, because there's also other charms that turn up in the vocabulary of the Anglo-Manx dialect as well. And that's largely down to her. A.W. Moore's name is on the title page. He never did any particular collecting. He put his hand up in a letter to Carl Roeder saying that I'm merely a compiler. I don't have time to go out among the people as you do. So, Moore is quite honest about that. Edwin Gooden, of course, was housebound. So the collecting, the material that turns up in the vocabulary of the Anglo-Manx dialect is down to Josephine Kermode, Cushit, and it's down to Sophia Morrison as well. So you can add to the 70 as well as here. Again, when you run through this as well, another surprise, of course, is there's nothing to do with toothache as well. So maybe Manx teeth were the best in the past, Maybe they were, I don't know. So you can see here, there's obviously similar material to Clague's own collecting, which is what you're going to get, but there's other material added here as well. To remove a birthmark, to stop bleeding, 17 charms there to stop bleeding. That's going to be a common issue when agricultural work that involves scythes, sickles, it involves machinery and so on, and also sort of work at sea as well. The chances of being cut are obviously just there. To cure cancer, St. Anthony's fire, to cure lumbago or rheumatism is there, numbness in the feet, ringworm, scalds, styes, and to remove warts as well. Let's say some of this material is in Manx, some of this material is in English as well. So it's interesting. I thought what's interesting about this is that all the charms to stop bleeding are all in English. There's nothing recorded in Manx, but the other ones you can see: to cure cancer, St. Anthony's fire, rheumatism, numbness in the feet, scalds, styes, warts. I'm just checking actually that I was right about that. Yes, all the charms to stop bleeding are only in English. And there were 17 of them. That can't be. Yeah. Anyway, just to point that. But the other useful thing too about Sophia Morrison as well is that there's other material as well. It's not just all medical complaints there. So if you want to foretell one's future husband, is anyone unmarried here? Come to me at the end, and we can run through this. If anyone wants to see their sweetheart tonight, come to me at the end. We can do this discreetly, and I can show you how to do it. And there's also one here for witchcraft as well. So, as I mentioned, I published on Dr John Clague's collection. I've also published the material on Sophia Morrison's collection. It doesn't lie behind a paywall. It's published by Incantatio again, so you're free to download this and read it at your leisure. Okay, we're in the halfway mark. Okay, do well. Okay, let's have a look at some of them. Let's run through some of these ones. This is just some that I've just selected. This is to stop blood. Before the flood, when water was wood, Jesus stood and firmly stood. I pray thee stop this blood of, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. You can see, drawing on obviously figures from the Bible, drawing upon almost sort of biblical language here. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, baptized in the River Jordan. As the water stood, the child spoke. I pray thee stop this blood, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. In thy name, I mean by thy power to stop this vein. In Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, by this power, I stop this vein. Yes, there's a certain poetry to this particular material. I'm going to say it's quite wonderful. Imagine if I was bleeding out, I would just say, just stop it, please. I'm not going to say, oh, isn't this wonderful? I haven't heard this charm before. This is a new one on me. Write this down while you have chance. No, I want to stop bloody. This is for a skull. This one is one that is collected all over Europe. I mean, few of these charms you'll find are in a sense specifically Manx. These are collected, these are known all over Europe, but we obviously have them in Manx English. We also have them in Manx Gaelic as well, but you'll find these collected all over Europe, all over in the vernaculars, in European vernaculars as well. This one is well known. This is for a skull. There were 3 angels came from the north, one to serve fire and one to serve frost and one to serve our Lord Jesus Christ. Out fire, enter frost in the name of our Saviour Christ the Lord, and so on. Another one, a more simpler one here. Place the hand lightly on the scald, then remove it, saying, I do this praying it won't blister in the name of the Father, and so on. You blow on the scald after each name in the trim. So there's always a performance to this. It's not just necessarily just simply saying this. There's elements of a performance when these charms are done. Here's one to remove a birthmark. Yes, place a dead hand on the mark. Once again, with a lot of Morrison's material here as well, you get this extra detail. This was tried near to Peel last winter and cured a baby with an ugly birthmark. The dead hand is... Well, from dead bodies. Yeah, it happens to us all. It must also be said it was done in the name of the Trinity. And again, place a dead hand on the mark. A man's hand for a girl, a woman's for a boy. Say it's done in the name of the Trinity. This extra detail here is always fascinating. It just shows you how good a collector Morrison was. This is another one too that's known throughout. This is known as even ash. This is a way to sort of tell who you're going to marry. Once again here, even ash I do these pluck, and in my bosom I thee put. The first young man that I do meet, I'll cross his name, and that'll be it. Yeah, it's all good stuff, isn't it? It's all good stuff. All good. But I say that's once again that's another charm that's known throughout you. You want to remove warts. This is where it gets a bit more serious here. There's often in many of these particular say there's often number symbolism coming here. Number 3 and the number 9, 9 particularly here as well. Here you see to cure a wart here. There's a gooseberry thorn through a ring, 9 times saying, little sty, go away and come back no more. The 9th thorn is then thrown over the left shoulder as well here. And he once again here with a snail. Tell nothing to nobody about what you're doing to do, but when the people are in the church of a Sunday, get hold of a snail and stitch it on a thorn bush. Go your ways every morning to the bush, take the snail and rub it over your warts. You say when you do this, then you do it in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. The snail slowly dies on the thorn, so will the warts that you go away. I know. It's a harder time the past, and when the snail is dead, there won't be a wart left. I know. For cancer, this is not one to... By the way, don't try any of these at home. I should have put in this. I don't know if Bob's got any sort of good indemnity insurance here for this as well. I don't know the Celtic Congress to be sued here as well. This is not the thing to try. Drinking hemlock. I don't think Socrates tried. That didn't work out too well for him, It's believed to cure all who are unsound in body and to be poisonous to those who are well. Okay. When I'm well, you make me sick. When I'm sick, you make me well. So maybe try that one at your literal peril, I think, in that particular case. Then we have this one again here for sort of St. Anthony's fire. Once again, you can see here, calling upon here the power of Christ, the Son of God. shifted to hills the highest, or the deep sea ebb and flowing. You say there's a wonderful poetry about these particular charms. You see there's a sense here of transference here, transferring as far away as possible, the highest hills, the deepest sea, and as the sea ebbs and flows, it will just wash it away from you as well. Ringworm, once again here, they say this, I put this up here for number symbolism here as well, ringworm red, do not spring, do not spread. And 3 times whilst rubbing around the ring red, it's rumming around in sunrise and so on. Number 3, number 9, very important in numerology. Here's one for lumbago, rheumatism. This one's in Manx. I think one reason to learn Manx is so you can cure your lumbago or your rheumatism. So, I'm not going to translate this for you. Ask Bob to call upon to translate for this one. So if you're suffering from rheumatism and lumbago, you don't want to go up to nobles, then take a Manx class, and then you'll be as right as rain. Okay, we had a question asked about the church's attitudes towards charming. Well, let's have a look at charming in the past, when the church courts did indeed have a view over, when they just simply weren't there to sort of preach to us on a Sunday, but when they did have, they did control much more of our lives than they do in the present day as well. So, main stuff for looking at charmers in the church court records are drawn from the Book of Presentments, which are every 3 times a year, there would be 4 people would meet in each parish, and they would present people, and they were often would present people for sexual offences, for sex outside of marriage, illegitimate children, also people who were swearing, people who had bad language, people who didn't go to church on Sunday, and also to people who were charmers, people who were practicing witchcraft, superstition, a broad rubric of offences that you could be brought to task for. And so you have the presentments 3 times a year, and those cases that weren't dealt with at parish level, they were then kicked up to the consistory court, and that's when you appeared before the bishop and the vicars general, and that record is in the Liber Causarum. So we do have, and say this because this talk was looking at sort of charms as texts rather than charming. This is one I picked up. This is Alice Cowley. This is from an incredible case, 1713. This is the last major case for witchcraft and sorcery. I say this is people accused of witchcraft and sorcery. This is not people who are necessarily doing witchcraft or sorcery. People accused of witchcraft and sorcery. So it's a lengthy case. This is Alice Cowley of Ballaugh. And so we have this wonderful charm from her. This is the evidence here that Alice Cowley demanded 7pence from her. This is the time when the Manx shilling had 14 pence. So this is why she's sort of getting half a shilling from her. She puts the coin in the earth here. She gathered some herbs to procure her a husband. And so we're using magic here to procure, to get the name of someone who would marry someone here. And that she used some words at the plucking of the herbs, which she taught the said Joni Neal to this purpose. So we have this notion here that charmers do not keep the charms to themselves, that they will pass the charm on to someone else, so they can also then use the charm at another date, and even pass the charm on themselves. And so we are fortunate that we have this charm. And this is an absolutely wonderful charm. Philip was the king of the fairies, and he was his wife. She would vow to God that there would never be one too young and old. I'll take the black spirit and cast from me the black spirit, and I will take it, and it shall be mine. I shall never be the evil spirit. And so we have this wonderful here, and obviously a lengthier charm here than it is recorded here, with much more than this Conan cannot recollect. This is always the thing. You always wish that the church court records would tell you more, that there would be more recorded. You think, couldn't you just put a bit more down, And nevertheless, so we do have this wonderful particular charm, and this is not the only charm she had as well here. Once again, this is another examination here. This is Edward Lawson and Joni Lawson here. their child being sick and having been child disorder, what they call the Archid. They sent for Alice Cowley, who accused us of used certain words at their first coming to the house and repeated the several words several times before they went away, which said words as near as they remember were these following. So they obviously are, they're obviously earwigging and able to hear what is particular said. And this is the other particular charm as well we have here, is the black blood running as black as red. I will take it, and it shall be mine, and I shall take no further heed of it. And so you can see here, if you look at the gloss here of Kelly's dictionary here, there's a notion here this child has either been elf shot, we'll look at elf shot in a few minutes, bewitched, enchanted here, or just, or here we have here, the other gloss of it here, fascination, damage caused by an evil eye, enchantment. So this is what they think, that the evil eye has been put on this child, or this child has been elf shot, and so they're getting a charm to particularly remove it. And we do have an elf shot charm. This is one that comes from Karl Roeder, and this is one that Manuela Timotin, as I say, from the Romanian Academy of Sciences, she wrote a PhD in this particular area of charms for elf shot in Europe, and this was completely unknown to her. But this has all of the hallmarks of being not a fabricated charm for this in this particular period. You look at 1897, you can always be a bit suspicious to see if someone is actually mocking something up here. But this you can see how this matches the other charms that we've been looking at here. Abraham lay at the feet of Jesus Christ and so on. So this is just by chance that I included this charm in the talk to get this particular feedback as well. We also have this other wonderful one. So we have to remember that charms are not just here to cure us, as it were, individuals, people. They're also here to cure animals as well. And so there's this wonderful presentment here from 1722 here at Santon here, sort of John Moore, one of the wardens, presents Thomas Chris the language of the record. This person who is one of the church wardens, one of the chapter quest, present to you for seeking a charm of Daniel Neal to staunch the blood of a horse. Daniel Neal has faithfully promised not to use charms for the future, being heartily sorry for his sin and the offence that he has given. This is the way to actually get off, although it didn't happen in this particular case. Thomas cleared to appear at the next consistory. Sometimes what you do is you just simply say, "Oh, did I do wrong? Well, I won't do it again. Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay." Sometimes people get kicked up, but you often find if you go and then try and find this record in Liber Causarum, there just isn't the case. And I don't think that's a question of a lost record. That is just a question of it's not really that serious for us to deal with at this particular level. As say, he's heartily sorry for the sin he's given and the offence that he has given. But this is the charm. And it's written large. It's absolutely remarkable. I was just looking at it the other day before the talk. It's absolutely wonderful. Once again, the language is familiar to us from the other particular charms, but again, your three Marys went to Rome, the spirits of the church stiles and the spirits of the brews. Peter and Paul, a Mary of them said, stand, a Mary of them said, walk. The other Mary said, may this blood stop, as the blood stopped which came out of the wounds of Christ. Me to say it, and the Son of Mary to fulfill it. Maybe, I just love this stuff. I can read these all day long, to be honest. These are just absolutely amazing. And so, I mentioned, these sort of offences, or what was seen as being offensive, as against the spiritual order in many particular ways, is that if you are ill, you should really rely upon God's providences to save you, and you shouldn't be resorting to charmers. So people who did then came into the purview of the chapter quest and then were particularly presented. So we get this extra detail here. This is Margaret Cowan here, for making charms for Ladden Kirk Andrews that was crazed and was presented for the same fact before. So these are people who have a reputation within the community as being charmers, that people would go to them time and time again. And once again, to give in bonds, never to use charms anymore. You've got to have your tongue in cheek here, who says the vicar is to make inquiry when this woman recovers, being now sick. Or you feel like saying, what's that old phrase, physician, heal thyself, It's rather ungenerous for me to say that, but you feel like saying that. And once again here saying, it's not just people, it's animals here. You get Richard Curfey here, one of the chapter quest himself. So it goes to show here that you are charged to maintain, as it were, this spiritual discipline amongst the parishioners of the parish. And you too can also fall foul of this well. So he's clearly presented himself to someone before someone presents him. So Robert Curfey, one of the chapter quests, presents himself for getting a charm for a sick cow. And this is the way, I say, this is the way you get off being sent up to face the consistory court, and where you'd actually face either the vicar generals, or in many cases you'd face Bishop Wilson himself. He has solemnly promised reformation. This time round, we'll find there are many people who solemnly promise reformation, but they don't quite get round to it as well. And so we get some other particular ones here. We get, well, what I find interesting with this one, Harry Woods here for going for charms to William Killian in Kirkmoran for a sick child, is informed against in Kirkmichael Court. That's actually informed against, that's the consistory court, likely a bishop's court. He and this one acts in prison. This is three days, in prison for 3 days. It's interesting here, you have someone who's Andrus, and they're going to someone in Moran. You start thinking, well, why is there no one in Andrus who can do this for you? And you can say here again here so I think here, there's a particular notion here of perhaps the further you go to give a charm, the more powerful it is. And we'll see this in another particular case where you see someone in Russian is giving charms in Malou. I don't know. That's just an idea that I'm throwing out there as well here. And you get here in Braddon as well here, Thomas Quine for practicing charms, but not of late, as if, but nevertheless, so these people being caught up. This is what gives me the detail that I can give talks about as well, and this one as well. Now this is again we can see here 1714, 1715. There's a lot of presentments for charming as well. It's often at times difficult to understand how there's the spike in the records in particular years, but it is just a question. Perhaps all it needs is just a poor harvest, poor fishing, that people just are malnourished. And so obviously these illnesses will come on. But once again here, Malou here, someone from Scard, travelling to using charms to Alice Quiggin. Once again here, Malou, someone here going to Anne Lowy. We'll look at her a bit later. Here we once again Thomas Farragher here for using charms to Joni Bella Balachari. So once again you can see here, people promising reformation, some particular people to be charged to the next history. These cases are, as was said at the back, they are taken seriously. Whether these are very prominent charmers, people who have a solid reputation in the parish, or whether people just get caught up at times, we don't know. And once again, I find this one is absolutely quite wonderful. There's some amusement at times to be get from the records here. This is in Michael here from 1744. The vicar and wardens present Adam Callister and Robert his son for sending for a charmer when Robert's wife was sick. They have appeared and declared that the man came to their house only in his way to a fair, and that they never had any intention to send for him. It's quite clearly, though, isn't it, that the man who came to their house is a charmer. And maybe he was on his way to a fair, maybe not. I don't know. I have my suspicions in there as well. So this is another case. Okay, Anne Lowy. We had Anne Lowy a few slides back here. She turns up in 1715, she turns up in 1716, and she turns up in 1717 as well. No keeping this woman down, I would actually say here. Here we have her in Malou. And look, we've got Malou, Russian and Malou again. Malou here in 1715, John Neil Weaver, sick. So once again, did that work? Did it not work for going to Anne Lowy for a charm? Charged to the next consistory court, former to getting a certificate thereof. Pops up again, 1716. The vicar is to give notice to William Lowy's wife to appear in the next consistory there to answer for her frequent charming. It's possible she didn't turn up. telling her this time, you're going to have to turn up this time. Once again, 1717, Anne Lowie is still going strong, for using charms to sick persons, John Kewen's and Thomas Quarkin's house there as well here. And I love this here, Anne Lowie having ingeniously confessed that she used some words by way of charm, which words she openly repeated in court, which unfortunately were not written down for us. She seems to be heartily sorry and solemnly promising never to practice the like again. The court has suspended her censure for the present. She doesn't turn up in the record thereafter, but one feels that if she was doing this in 1715, 1716, 1717, she's still doing it in 1718, so good luck to her, I think, for keeping on going. Okay, I will kept you a bit long enough here now. I will run to an end here. Let's have one final charm as collected by Sophia Morrison. This is the one that I promised you at the start. This is how to see your sweetheart. To see one's sweetheart, say the Lord's Prayer backwards 3 times. I knew a girl that did this once, Mary Lewin, and she saw her sweetheart right enough, but she was plagued for long enough after it. For as soon as it was after sunset, no matter when, she would be stones and clods of turf and sticks would be flung at her, and no one could find out who did it. So be careful of what you wish for, and just stick to charms for stopping blood. I will finish here. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for the invitation to speak.